Today, as we might well know by now, is Advent 1. So tell me, what is the theme of Advent 1? The theme is hope, in case you hadn't picked it up in any of the liturgy, in any of the words. So let's begin with an easy question, shall we? What is hope? I'm glad if you have an answer. If we look to today's gospel, hope, we might presume, resides the other side of suffering darkness, of stars falling and the heavens being shaken. Hope resides in words that will not pass away. Beware, keep alert, keep awake. Hope is not yet, not in what is. If in biblical reference we do trust, when searching what is hope, we might find ourselves in Romans 8, which reads, "For in hope we were saved." Now, hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. In hope we were saved. Hope that is seen is not hope. If we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Well, hope, referring to this context, appears to be something that we are quite passive before. What about the context, hope in the context in which we find ourselves? Some of you may know that for the past couple of years, I've been participating in an online community of Deep Pacific change agents. Every 6 weeks, a group of us, mainly from Australia and New Zealand, meet via Zoom. Yes, there was a thing called Zoom before COVID-19. The meeting is hosted by an American woman, Carol Sanford, who has some international renown as a change agent herself, particularly in the regenerative process. Carol says the most important thing to do is to not believe anything that she says. She challenges us to test what she says, not to unthinkingly trust it. We learn together as we share, and we test her propositions against our own lived experience. We met a couple of weeks ago, and I was struck by a question she posed that went something like this. How often do we work on something we don't know how to think about? I'll repeat that. How often do we work on something we don't know how to think about? He was puzzled as I was about that, but it's one of those kernel things that gets into your brain. Is it just a nonsense? How is that even possible, to work on something you don't even know how to think about? Mind you, how do you hope in something you haven't seen? So let us consider. What do we want the impact of our life to be? The life we're currently living, by the grace of God and with some good health, that we hope to continue to live for some time. Yet we don't know what, or perhaps how, our life will play out. Yes, we can strategize, and we can plan, and we can imagine its shape, but we don't know what it will actually be. And the longer we live, the more we realize that the unlikely, the unexpected, surprising happens more often than not. How many 5-year plans made since 2015 included the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020? By way of example. So say we want our life to contribute into the world, perhaps for good, and maybe we can be more specific. We want our life to contribute for the good of the planet, to relieve homelessness, for the jobless to have jobs, to relieve child poverty, for our whānau, or for our community. Each of these types of things we might want to live for, or to hope for, is a life lived towards something beyond us, for a greater cause. The reality is that what we do emerges from who we are, as individuals, as groups, as entities. Our doing emerges and expresses our thinking, our understanding, our learning. How much time do we spend paying attention to how we think, to how we understand? Because if we want or imagine or hope for something, for a way for the world to be that is unlike the way it is, for this to come into being, to be the work we do, to be the impact of our life, it requires us to be able to pay attention to how our thinking outworks. And maybe, if it's not outworking as we planned or hoped, to learn to think differently. Because our habits and our ways of thinking are creating the world we live in. When I pose the question, what is hope, I pose it here. Not in a vacuum, but in a Christian context. And this context talks and tells a story about God with us, that we are divinely companioned, if you like. The question of hope, therefore, is posed into a context of assumed presence, not absence, not a vacuum. It's into a world that talks about there being a presence, divine presence. The reading that we heard from Isaiah is part of a longer passage, and it's in the form of a lament. And in the tradition, the lament is understood to be a profound statement of faith in God from the midst of utter human hopelessness. The worshipper prays in the midst of their pain, believing that their condition is cared for. They are trusting the outcome to be held in God and that they are not abandoned. So with this as a reference point, how might we understand hope? Might it suggest hope is about having courage to remain present in all of life's challenges, even in deepest despair, that a peculiar courage and resolve arises because we believe something deeper, or we experience that something deeper resides, holds, and grounds us. So the lament is a profound statement of faith. In the context of Christian faith, what has faith to say of hope? Again, if we turn to the Bible, our search might lead us to Hebrews 11. It reads like this: Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. So faith is assurance, conviction, and understanding of things hoped for and not seen. But again, hope seems something we're passive before. Faith is a trusting dependency upon God who will enact that which is hoped for. Could this be a way to make sense of our human experience, a way to interpret the way the world is? That we've looked back and we're creating a story and we continue to tell it like this into the future? We might be passive before it, but what is hope? What is it? Well, how about instead we ask what's something we hope for? Say, a world without suffering. A world where honest and truthful, mutually beneficial exchange prevails rather than one of incessant wrangling for power. Well, speaking to such aspiration is Yuval Harari. Some of you may have read his stuff, Homo sapien, Homo Deus, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, which is what I'm going to quote from. Yuval Harari is an author, an Israeli public intellectual, and a professor of history. And he proposes, truth and power can travel together only so far. Sooner or later, they go their separate ways. If you want power, At some point, you will have to spread fictions. If you want to know the truth, at some point you will have to renounce power. You will have to admit things that will anger allies, dishearten followers, or undermine social harmony. Scholars throughout history found this dilemma. Do they serve power or truth? Should they aim to unite people by making sure everyone believes in the same story? Or should they let people know the truth even at the price of disunity? As a species, he asserts, humans prefer power to truth. We spend far more time and effort on trying to control the world than on trying to understand it. And even when we try to understand it, we usually do so in the hope that understanding the world will make it easier to control. Therefore, he says, if you dream of a society in which truth reigns supreme and myths are ignored, you have little to expect from Homo sapiens. He suggests chimpanzees might be a better option. It's interesting, a little bit niggling perhaps. Maybe we could understand this as his way of looking back, of interpreting human experience to create a story that continues to be told into the future. But are we willing to consider that what we might hope for, more often than not, is founded on what we know? And it is prejudiced by our human preference for power over truth. Most of what we hope for, I suspect, is what we see. And it is creating this world we occupy. So what of hope? Well, perhaps hope gives us courage to live with what is, with the way things are, with our plans and expectations being disconcertingly interrupted, courage to remain present even in the suffering that living fully might bring. For we do not hope for what we have. Thomas Merton reminds us. Hope empties our hands in order that we may work with them. It shows us that we have something to work for, and it teaches us how to work for it. In the season of Advent, in the Sunday of Hope, if we want things and our world to be otherwise, maybe it's time to wake up. Maybe it's time to pay attention, to be alert, to keep awake to our habits, our habitual ways of thinking. For in doing so, we will pay attention also to what we do, and pay attention to how we think and what we do might make all the difference to and in the world.